Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Andy Gower, and I'm really excited to be joining you guys today for an exciting topic on licenses, tariffs, what's next, how to protect your IT budget in a changing world. And I'm really excited to be joined here today by Michael St. John from Red Hat. Michael, you want to give a quick introduction about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Michael St. John, I'm a program director at Red Hat in our global partner ecosystem, responsible for cross-route or cross-ecosystem initiatives.
Great. And for those of you who have not heard me before, my name is Andy Gower. I'm the Director of Partner and Solutions Marketing here at Portworx by Pure Storage, working very closely with Michael and the Red Hat team on all things around this topic and many others. So with that, let's actually dive in. And before we talk about tariffs and licenses, let's talk about Red Hat Summit. Red Hat Summit was last week in Boston. It was a really exciting event. Portworx was there as a platinum sponsor for the first time. And I know, Michael, you were running around the show. Tell me some of the highlights you saw and takeaways from your time at Summit last week.
Andy, it was great. It was full of energy. Unfortunately, the weather in Boston wasn't the greatest, but aside from that, I mean, we had so many people at this year's summit and so many great sessions too, from customers and partners alike, giving a lot of insights into how their organizations around the world are really overcoming some of the challenges that they face. And, there were some sessions out there around security, how to mitigate cyber attacks, things like that, addressing some of the unexpected cost increases for platforms like virtualization that's ingrained in their infrastructure, and as well as uncertainty about some of the socioeconomic impacts of changing geopolitical landscapes, just like tariffs or investments in programs and policies, regulations, as well as deregulations that we're seeing happening really across the globe these days. And then, of course, what would be an IT conference these days without talking about AI? So there's a lot of discussion about the evolution of AI, and we've seen AI and predictive models for years now, but this new explosion in generative and agentic AI, its use cases, some of the regulation that we need to be cognizant of in AI, and that's really, a lot of that is burgeoning now, as well as potential augmentation versus displacement of the workforce. All of these questions that are coming up as we see this huge move to AI models, and of course automation in all of this new landscape. So, decided focus on event-driven automation, things that might trigger AI agents to perform tasks. A lot of just great sessions, and I had a lot of great partner meetings and customer meetings while I was there as well.
You hit all the topics I was going to, and I think what excites me is, I think what I saw was this year, it was less about the promise of the future and more about the future's here, and there's people doing these things and actually, putting them into production, actually working through them. We had the great fortune of having SiriusXM, a joint customer of ours, on theCUBE during Red Hat Summit, talking about their virtualization journey. Fiserv is another one, talking about what they're doing to modernize both their data center and modernize what they're doing with OpenShift on the public cloud. So a lot of the things you touched on, virtualization, AI, they're becoming realities. They're no longer promises, and I think that's particularly exciting to see. And the energy was just unmatched too. I think we saw over 1,000 people come through our booth, and there's 7,000 plus people there in attendance. So really great show from my perspective all around.
Yeah,
so
I'm glad that you got some benefit out of it too. It's really a great place to bring everybody together. And in addition, we do have Summit Connects that we do for the rest of the year in select cities around the globe, so people can come in. There will be more technical sessions or more business level executive sessions at those Summit Connects that will be coming up around the world as well.
Yeah, and Portworx and Pure will be at all of them in North America, many of them across the rest of the globe. So we'll table the Red Hat Summit talk for now and just say, hey, if you want to hear more and kind of dive into it more deeply, we'll be, there throughout the year, and please come and talk to us, and don't hesitate to reach out at any time. But what I want to really spend the rest of the time talking about is I want to double click on the kind of overall concept around licenses, tariffs, and how that's really coming to life for customers and enterprises today, the changes they're facing, the challenges they're facing, and how, frankly, some companies are taking advantage of the opportunity to get a competitive advantage against their competitors. So, let's start with something that I think unearthed itself really in all of the changes around the Broadcom VMware acquisition. Certainly something we've heard around cloud for years, which is there are hidden costs of lock-in, and they're not something you necessarily consider when you move in to a technology or to a solution. But with all this consolidation, talk a little bit about some of those hidden costs and lock-in, and from a Red Hat point of view, why that open approach is so important to everything Red Hat does to help mitigate some of those hidden costs.
Yeah, well, and if we just think about it a little bit, if you're looking at a platform or technology that is a proprietary intellectual property owned by a company, it sort of sets itself up to a certain model. Now, in the software industry, you need to be cognizant of two things. What is your growth factor, and what is your net revenue factor, right? And those two things have to add up to something that over time continues to meet a certain threshold, right? Just normal business practices. Well, one of the things that you might see is as your growth in a particular product or technology starts to wane, well, you need to keep your net revenue going in a forward direction, right? And so there's this line where you need to at least meet this minimum over time. And so in a typical IP-driven, intellectual property driven technology, if you get to a point where you're starting to lose growth, well, what's your option? Either you innovate and you drive that growth back up, or you raise the prices. Now, if you're in a locked-in situation and you have lots and lots of customers out there, install-based customers out there, it might be easy enough for you to say, okay, well, they're locked in. It's going to be very difficult or very costly for them to move. So I'm just going to drive up my price. Now, in an open source world, that's not really an option, because in fact, all of the open source technology is built and is free for people to use. So it's more of a question of okay, so if we don't continuously innovate, we're going to lose that growth pattern, and there's nothing that we can do. If we raise the prices, people are just going to go elsewhere, or they're going to go and do it themselves with the tools that have been created out there. And so it's this distinct different business model between a company like Red Hat that is really based in open source versus an intellectual property proprietary company like others that we see in the world. And whether or not they do end up raising the prices, they can always be acquired by somebody who just wants to sap the resources or the assets that company has, versus a company like Red Hat. And we were acquired a few years ago by IBM, but we don't have intellectual property per se. It's all in open source. So really, the basis of that purchase was the people. It's the people and the thought leadership that we provide to the IT world. And so it's a very different business model, I think.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. And kind of when I think about this, there's two places that people don't think about in a lock-in situation immediately. One is product roadmaps and product investment, and the other is people skills and people investment. And when you're in a lock-in situation, when something changes and an acquisition happens or a consolidation happens or whatnot, you lose control over that roadmap, which can have a direct impact on you. at the end of the day, as you said, Kubernetes is open source. So what Red Hat's doing, what Portworx is doing, the underlying technology is open source. So no matter what happens from an industry perspective, the underlying platform can be driven by the community forward. And that's something that's extremely powerful for companies to maintain. And that translates to the skill side as well, right? It's great to have specialization, but if your specialization is just, in one technology stack and it changes, you have trouble taking advantage of that skill set. Whereas again, with Kubernetes, with open source, folks can be trained up on Red Hat, but if suddenly they acquire a company that's using a different Kubernetes platform, it's not a dramatic shift to bring that into the fold and manage, Kubernetes in two different locations, as it may have been with something like a VMware or another stack.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
And I think this leads into the next question, which is kind of at a core for business leaders, for business innovators and thinkers. How, in this world where you can't quite predict when a consolidation is going to happen, when a new tariff is going to get rolled out, when a licensing model is going to change, what is it that enterprises can do to help maintain predictability and maintain the ability from a budget perspective to plan and invest in light of everything that's happening around them at the macroeconomic level?
Yeah, and I kind of think about technical debt as it relates to modernizing an IT system, an IT platform. Really thinking about it as an overall system, right? So, I think part of the problem that we've seen businesses run into before is they kind of separate the IT and the IT infrastructure from the business part of it. But if you take it conceptually as a full part of, everything is part of the system, and you look at it from that perspective, it's really, there are certain things within the infrastructure costs, within the platform costs, that will drive your ability to enhance your business. And so I kind of think of things from a technical depth positioning, looking at your existing infrastructure costs, what types of things that you can consolidate within your environment. So, for example, if you are running multiple projects and you're using different technologies, whether it be cloud or you're using bare metal deployments or you're using virtual machines, and you're doing each of these, you're running each of these projects in their own silos. Probably you also have multiple different methodologies, multiple different coding structures that you're using as well. All of this ends up becoming an area where you're creating a lot of technical debt over time. So being able to consolidate all of these different infrastructure choices, all of these different methodologies, modalities that you're building within your environment, and bring them into a common infrastructure that not only runs in one solution, whether it's in-house on-prem, but can span from edge to the core data center, out to a cloud environment, or out to a sovereign cloud or managed service provider. And being able to have that flexibility to bring your infrastructure across multiple modalities and consolidate all of these different ways and methodologies of solving problems with all of your projects is going to, over time, save you quite a bit of money.
Yeah, I think that flexibility piece is key, especially in kind of the construct of, sudden cost spikes because of tariffs, or sudden cost spikes because of data locality, or sudden, changes in the business environment. So the ability to say, hey, today I'm going to run it on the public cloud, but if tomorrow something comes along and says, hey, the public cloud is no longer a safe place for me because of data locality, I need to move it back to a specific data center or to a specific private cloud, that the cloud provider is offering, I can do that without having to retool. And that flexibility, I think, is how enterprises maintain predictability, right? If everything you have is in one place and you're locked in, kind of going back to our first question, if something comes along, you have no flexibility to make changes. And so having an underlying stack with, an open source technology, again, like Kubernetes or similar, lets you have that flexibility to get a predictable budget view for your enterprise amidst all the macroeconomic changes.
Well,
and, I think,
and you mentioned, I'm sorry. I was going to say,
no,
you mentioned tariffs in here specifically, right? And I think it's, in the U.S., this is a big deal right now, but I think it is rippling across the global landscape, right? But, if you think about tariffs, I kind of think of it as just another disruption, because it's just that we are used to doing things in a certain way with certain constructs. If we had tariffs for 20, 30 years that we were dealing with, that's the way that we would be structuring our businesses. So this is just an example of another disruption that's out there, right? And so being able to have that ability to shift and make use of the platforms and maintain budget based on where you might have to move your systems and where you can predictably take workloads that would perhaps work better in a cloud environment versus an on-prem environment. That's the ability to maintain better budget predictability, regardless of what that disruption might be, whether it be tariffs or whatnot.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. And as I thought about this topic and everything rolling out, you can even look at consolidation in the industry as a form of a tariff or a disruption, right? They have the same impact. It's something is going up in price in my stack. It's impacting my business. How do I make sure that I'm able to respond to that quickly? It could be a tariff, could be, a consolidation. But I think that leads nicely into this next question, which is, a lot of companies now are looking at budget pressure. And so, there's this case where rather than doing a complete overhaul or, a refresh of my data center, maybe there's an opportunity for me to just modernize my legacy infrastructure, modernize what I already have in place and take advantage of that rather than do a full rip and replace. And I know certainly from a Portworx perspective, this is something we talk about with customers all the time as being a great approach. So the beauty of Kubernetes, the beauty of software-defined storage is that it allows you to virtualize whatever your back-end block device is. That could be a high-end flash array. It could be some local drives. It could be something you have in a data center that you barely touched for 5 years. But as long as you can you serve it up as a block device, you've got an opportunity to pull it into the Kubernetes world, into the OpenShift world, and use it in a modern landscape. So rather than investing in new arrays or new fleets in your data center, you can take advantage of what's there. And I know from a Red Hat perspective, you have a very similar view with how the application layer layers on top of an existing infrastructure as well.
Yeah, I'm always in favor of talking to businesses about looking at their existing infrastructure and deciding what the value and the return is on that, right? Because in some cases there's been so much of technology increases and leapfrog of technologies in the infrastructure over the past 5-10 years that some of the older legacy equipment that you might have out there might actually be a detriment, and you end up being able to save more money operationally by refreshing some of that equipment. That said, you don't have to, right? If you have some existing equipment that you have running some legacy or traditional applications in virtual machines, let's say, and you want to reuse all of that infrastructure, you have the ability to do so with Red Hat OpenShift, and of course with Portworx on the storage side, bringing in some of the capabilities from a backup HA, high availability disaster recovery perspective, being able to take those workloads and make workloads stateful within a Kubernetes type of construct, and thus supporting VMs in this new this new infrastructure running on the same equipment that you may have already existing in your data center.
And I think that last point really, our partnership really shines in a lot of cases here, where customers, maybe again to this overarching topic, you've got a sudden spike, whether it's tariffs, whether it's because of your virtualization costs, and so you're looking for ways to squeeze some budget out a couple more years. Maybe it's just a case of, hey, I need my existing infrastructure to last for 2 to 3 more years, and then I can do a refresh. Well, the beauty of our partnership and kind of the approach that we've taken, leveraging Kubernetes, is you can build that today. You can use what's in there today, and when you're ready to cycle through that refresh, when you're ready to upgrade your backend storage, you're not replacing your entire stack. You're not having to go install a new set of drivers or a new set of application layers or a new set of databases. You simply can take offline your old hardware and bring new hardware online. And so from a business perspective, that gives you a lot of flexibility, going back to kind of our buzzword today, to be able to make the investments you need to make and also delay the investments you need to delay, kind of at your own pace. And so,
absolutely.
I've got 2 more questions that I want to touch on before we wrap up. I think this one is a really, important one. We touched on this a little bit in a different, context, but in addition to tariffs and consolidations, we're also seeing compliance become an increasingly important requirement. You talked about security certainly being a hot topic at Red Hat Summit. What is it about Portworx, about Red Hat, about the broader thought process that IT leaders should have when they think about ensuring compliance with these different mandates, which are often non-negotiable and may have very short windows to put into place within a locality?
Well, and I think we have to start with the basics, right? And that is having a hardened, resilient platform upon which to build, right? And so, one of the reasons for, people come to Red Hat and look at technologies like Red Hat OpenShift is, yes, and I mentioned it before, we have an open source development model, but one of the benefits of coming to a company like Red Hat is that you can take Kubernetes, but you need a lot of additional tools in order to make it really enterprise ready, right? You need monitoring and logging. You need to have capabilities of building out a development platform, CI/CD technologies, pipelines, serverless, all these different components that need to be brought into that environment to make it actually work. And so one of the things that Red Hat does is we bring in an opinionated view of what those tools should be, because there's lots of them in the open source community, and we harden them, and we make sure that they all work together, that they're maintained together, and that they're able to support an enterprise type of deployment. Now, you go one step further by adding in things like role-based access controls, authorization, authentication throughout the environment, but also additional levels of support around industry standards. In the US, we have a federal standard called FIPS that we comply to, and there are different levels that you need to maintain over time. And so coming to a platform provider like Red Hat, you have all of these things that are part and parcel to the product offering that we bring to bear. So that's level one. Building in the resilience and disaster recovery is sort of that level 2. Now, bringing in additional things like security and compliance to different regulations around the world, being able to enable things like data locality for your applications. So, for example, in Europe, there's a compliance around DORA, where you have to be able to have your data recover in a sovereign container within a particular country. right? And so being able to move your data into an environment like that is very important. And in fact, at Summit, there was a session where we talked about, actually it was a session between, actually it was a session that was presented by Accenture and Red Hat, that where we were talking about data sovereignty and being able to move your data from one environment to another and achieve that compliance within country.
Yeah, and I think it ties in great, perfectly to kind of the storage and data approach, right? So when we think about data locality, data, of course, is in the name there, and so everything you do from a tooling perspective has to be able to support data within the Kubernetes construct, right? So this question is about how do I make sure I can go down that digital transformation route with that compliance in mind, and having tools that are purpose built for a Kubernetes landscape is key from the data side. So I think about what you said around DORA, around GDPR. I've got to be able to show that the data is in a specific place at a specific time to comply with those regulations. Well, do you have a storage and data tool that lets you get to that fine-grained view of containers, of namespaces, of applications? Can I specifically say, I need this application to be running, on this specific storage class, or in this specific region, or in this specific geography? Those are not things that, a traditional storage approach maintains. That's something that requires you to have a purpose-built, Kubernetes native approach to storage. And so I think that's key for customers. Now, we shouldn't let compliance be a hindrance to digital transformation. I point to, we recently had HSBC speak at KubeCon in London. They're all in on Kubernetes, and it's transforming what they're doing. They're running millions of transactions a day with Portworx on the back end. So it tells you can go to scale. You can have a digital transformation initiative with compliance. It's about having the right tools in place to make sure that you are able to maintain that compliance, wherever you go. So, before we end here, I do want to end with one question, and this is an important one. Get your perspective, and certainly I'll add mine, which is what distinguishes those IT organizations that thrive in this disruption instead of react to it? What's the difference between organizations like that HSBC, where they're at scale, they're able to comply with these new regulations, but also support billions of transactions a day, and maybe those enterprises that are stuck trying to find a solution right now?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like an age-old question, right? I've been in the industry for a while, and it seems like I've been having this conversation for decades now around, is IT a cost center, or is it really an enabler to enhance your business? And I think it really comes down to how people or how organizations view their IT organization, right? And is it, like I was saying before, part of the overall system, or is it just an IT center that is being used by the greater business? And I contend that it really needs to be part and parcel, and we see a lot of these new technologies coming up. But I mean, we've seen that over the past 3 decades, right? Every time there's a shift in technology, and there's a shift in ways that people can use that technology to benefit their business, right? And so it's nothing new. It is new, but it's nothing different than the changes that we've seen for my entire time in the industry, at least, and I'm sure going back a long time before that. So I think it really comes down to a question of, how do you see your IT organization? Is it actually part of that system? Because if it is, then it is an enabler to your business, but it needs to be part and parcel, right? And so as you're looking at some of these features that you can get out of AI, some of the things that you can get from automation, it needs to be tied back to, what is your business goal, and how do you use these technologies to your benefit? And truly, if you don't understand those things, because typically a lot of organizations, that's not your core competency. If you don't understand those things, there are lots of system integrators out there who do have these consultancy practices that can really help with that. I see that time and time again working with our global system integrators, our regional system integrators, who have really great resources to help make sense and bring together the business side as well as technology side going forward.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. Is IT part of the strategic discussion, right? As we know, every company has yearly strategy meetings. They plan out potential disruptions. How do I make product innovations? What am I investing in? What am I not investing in? I think the companies who are prepared to make a shift in what they're doing with the virtualization disruption, those are the companies that are constantly bringing IT to the table and saying, hey, there's a new technology. Let's test it. Maybe it doesn't fit for us, but let's test it. Let's see what it works. Let's see what doesn't work. Let's give IT, let's give that organization a seat at the table instead of being caught flat-footed. I think there's a lot of organizations that said, hey, it works. We never expect that VMware is going to go away. It just works. It's not something we're gonna debate. And all of a sudden, oh, what are the options? What are the things we're looking at versus the companies who have been constantly innovating, looking, thinking, trying to figure out how to take advantage of new technology. So, I think if I would leave one thing for folks who are listening, it's make sure you're staying tuned in, as you said, to AI. Not every AI solution is going to fit your business, but many of them may disrupt what you're doing. So if you're not testing them, if you're not engaging with things and trying them and playing with them today, you will face that disruption and you won't be prepared for it. So
yeah. Definitely stay informed, read some of the articles out there, the thought leadership articles, go on YouTube, go to the Red Hat channel, go to the Portworx channel on YouTube. We have so much material out there that I don't know, personally, I think it's very, very interesting to just watch some of the technologies that are coming out today, but also having some of those greater business discussions about how people, organizations, companies around the world are tackling some of their biggest problems with open source technology today.
Yeah, and reach out to us, right? We've got technical leaders and business leaders who can talk to you, understand more about your business, think about how Portworx and Red Hat can assist. We've got, as Michael said at the beginning, Red Hat Summit Connects. We've got other events going on that are really focused on not just the technical detail, which is important, but also just what is the real world implementation? What does it look like to actually do some of these things that we're talking about? What does the transformation entail? What is the skills gap I need to address? What is the investment I need to make? Engage with us. That's what we're here for. We hope you reach out. We hope you'll do that. And thank you for taking the time today to listen to join Michael and I. Feel free to reach out with questions, and hope everyone has a great day. And we'll see you soon. Michael, thanks a lot for joining me today.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, Andy.